Well, Labour's finance spokesman Andy Kerr joins me now. Your idea of locking up anyone who carries a knife, do you really mean that? Anyone who carries a knife?
What we mean to say is that if anyone leaves their house, their home, goes out for an evening, young or old, if they're carrying a knife across their threshold, then we want a mandatory minimum sentence applied. Courts, of course...
Of 6 months?
Yes, and courts will, of course, have a degree of latitude, but that would be what we require them to do, as it is...
Sorry, if they've got a degree of latitude, it's not mandatory?
Well, no, because there will be situations whereby the courts can make decisions around that, but the expectation from us, through the legislation that we'll bring forward, will be to deliver that very promise, because that reflects, I have to say, the communities.
I'm confused already. If the courts have discretion over it, then it's not mandatory. That's as much of a simple definition.
Oh God, with due respect, that's not true. The courts always have a degree by which they can live within the legislation. What we'll say, for instance, if a woman is defending herself with a knife and can be proven to do that, can be proven to be part of the case, then of course that's what would happen. But I would argue that 99.9% of these cases, people carrying a knife, crossing their door of an evening, will go to jail as a result of that. And that's what communities want, that's what they need, that's a reflection from our consultation, from the petitions.
So if I go out into the garden and do some work, and I put a pruning knife in my pocket, as I often do, and someone pops in and says, let's go for some lunch, and I go down the pub, and I forget to leave the knife, and I get caught with a knife, do I go to jail?
Well, thank you for answering my point, Gordon. That's why judges will have a degree by which they can make decisions based upon the evidence before them. But the expectation is, I have to say, your case is not what we see in Glasgow, what we see in Inverclyde, what we see in anyone elsewhere in this country. What we see is kids, largely kids,
yes, but the law is not going to be it's mandatory for young people in Glasgow, but not anyone else.
Sorry,
no.
What I'm saying is your scenario is quite unique or different in terms of what we're seeking to do. It is about 50% of deaths in this country are caused by knife crime. We have more crimes in Scotland due to knife crime. We've got £500 million being spent in the NHS as a result of this, and communities want it, and they deserve it, and they'll get it.
Right, but if there is discretion for the courts in this, it's not mandatory. I mean, what exactly is the difference?
But there's always been discretion. There's discretion around gun.
Well, exactly what I don't understand. Why is what you're proposing any different from what happens at the moment?
Because at the moment, of the 3,000 cases of those carrying knives, 2,000 of them don't get a prison sentence. We want that to change. We want to shift that balance completely in the other direction. What
if the judges say that the other 1,000
are carrying pruning knives? Give us a break, Gordon. Come on, be realistic about this. £500 million, 3 to 6% of the NHS budget being spent on people coming to A&E with knife injuries.
So the courts wouldn't have the discretion to say that some kid who had not been in trouble before and who maybe did have a knife, that actually in this particular case...
Our expectation would be, if anybody crosses the threshold of their home carrying a knife, then they should face that sentence. And that's what communities want.
The costing of this...
Indeed.
I mean, the point is, I'm not going to argue, because you can pluck these figures out of thin air.
No, you can't. No, well, actually,
yes, you can.
These figures will be tried and tested. We know they'll be tried and tested by CPPR, amongst others.
But surely it's not.
What's your question then?
Well, my question is, my point is, it's uncostable, not so much uncosted.
No. Well, 3,000 cases, 1,000 of them go to jail, 2,000 of them don't, 6 months sentence, 700 places currently available, Lomos coming back on stream. We've put in £20 million contingency fund, fully costed proposal, and we'll deliver on it.
Right, but
that's what the facts tell us.
Okay, now you may be right that you bring this law and everything, and people think, oh my God, right, better not carry a knife anymore, and therefore it doesn't cost anything.
That sounds good.
But what if you put it in and you say to the police, well, this is our priority, we've told the people of Scotland, and they go and search a lot more people for knives, and they find, I don't know, rather than 3,000, they find 6,000.
I hope they're searching them just now.
And they all go to jail.
They should be searching them just now.
In which case you've got 6,000 of the 8,000 places in Scottish jails just... Well, I mean, where on earth are all these places going to come from?
I'll tell you where the places are going to come from, based upon, not your scenario, but common sense. We have got, in November 2010, with 700 extra places. The Lomos, delayed albeit by the SNP, is now coming on stream. We've got a 6-month minimum sentence. It can be delivered within existing scope, but just to be sure, because of guys like you questioning our manifesto, we've put in a £20 million contingency to ensure that we can cover the cost of this.
It's not going to build you.
Plus the deterrents. And you describe an increase in knife crime. There's an absolute deterrence in this, which should reduce the
No,
number
I
of
didn't
people
describe an
carrying
increase in knife crime. What I was suggesting was that if the police, on your advice, were to take this more seriously as an issue or make it a priority, I'm not saying they don't take it seriously at the moment, they could well discover more people carrying knives and the whole thing could rocket. I mean, as you know, the figures for knife crime anyway tend to
go wildly
up and down.
To that? Good. I'll tell you why. The £500 million bill in the NHS will go down. Lives will not be lost. People will not be maimed for life. And it's a spend to save policy because we've stopped people entering our A&Es as a result. 3 to 6% based upon estimates
so
of our NHS budget is based upon knife crime.
5,000 people.
We've got to deal with that.
Oh, right. So there's only 8,000 prison places in Scotland. That's about the figure at the moment. So 5,000
and Lomos is coming back on stream.
Extra
700 available just now and Lomos coming on stream.
Right. And you wouldn't want to build any more jails, would you? Or you would? You'd just say, oh, no, my gosh, no, we at our encouragement, the police are arresting more people. We'll build more jails.
We're now speculating upon your question. I would suggest that in government we'll make sure that we monitor the situation and respond as appropriately.
But the basic philosophy behind this is that, I mean, it's almost a cliche now that putting young people in jail, the recidivism rates are extremely high, and that it just becomes a school for crime. Now, Kenny McCaskill has quite explicitly recognised that and says he wants a presumption against sending people to jail for minor offences. You want to abolish that presumption?
We want to make sure that if half the murders in Scotland are caused by knives, if there's 3,000 people charged
but no one is
and found
against
guilty,
putting people in jail for murdering people with knives. No one's against that.
But how do you end up being a murderer? You end up being a murderer as a young kid in the west of Scotland, particularly, carrying a knife out of your home and using that knife. You didn't leave the house perhaps with that intention, but it happened. We need to stop them crossing the threshold of their homes with that knife, and that legislation will do it. Right.
Let's talk about some of your newly found policies. In 2006, you said of the proposed closure of Monklands Accident and Emergency, I am firmly of the view that it is in the best interests of patients. Is it still in the best interests of patients?
My response to that is that the NHS Lanarkshire have reversed that decision and assured the people of Lanarkshire that they can provide those services. And I think the challenge that I have as a Lanarkshire MSP, hopefully after the election, is to make sure they deliver their commitment both to primary care and to secondary care. But all the advice they gave to me pre-2006 and up to the decision I made was they had difficulties in sustaining the service. Since then they've said they can do it, and I'm keeping a close eye, as is Jackie Bailey, to make sure they do that.
When Nicola Sturgeon cancelled the decision that you wanted to make, and you accused her of putting patients' lives at risk.
I have to say, could I also say that David Kerr, Professor David Kerr, widely respected and supported in the Scottish Parliament, also said that.
Would you like to apologise to Nicola Sturgeon now that you agree with her?
I would like to make sure the NHS Lanarkshire delivers both the investment in secondary and primary care. But you now agree with
Nicola Sturgeon, so how can she be putting patients' lives at risk? So in fact, she never was putting patients' lives at risk.
No, what I would say is that the evidence was available to me, provided to me by NHS Lanarkshire, which was that this measure...
But that's a serious allegation to make. And you're not prepared to withdraw it and apologise, even though you now agree with her.
I have to say, if there's anybody apologising for anything in any of these situations, it's the government for many of the decisions they've taken in the last 4 years. What I'm saying is, I based my decision upon the advice given to me by NHS Lanarkshire.
Right.
They have subsequently changed that advice, and they need to make sure they deliver both in primary and secondary care.
When you were the Health Minister, you said that plans to abolish prescription charges meant that money, quote, would be taken from the health service to provide prescriptions for those who can already afford them. Why were you wrong?
Well, interestingly, we've made a manifesto commitment which I thought I was here to talk about. My argument at that time was in relation to the position that I found myself in at that moment in time and the impact of those decisions. Since then, there's been you're asking me about 5 or 6 years ago in terms of policy. Things have changed. We have decided that in terms of the...
So what's changed?
What's changed in terms of the position that most Scots find themselves...
The changed is your mind.
As in relation to the council tax and prescription charges, what we have said to the Tories, for instance, is that they're putting too much pressure on Scottish families at a time when they're trying to grow consumer confidence and grow the economy. We are now acknowledging the current economic climate in which we find ourselves.
Because of the financial crisis that you've changed your mind.
What I'm saying is across the policy. I mean, our policies 5 years ago need to reflect cannot, sorry, reflect the situation that we now find ourselves in. Of course we have to change because the economic climate has changed radically and we need to change to meet those current economic climates.
Right, so when you criticised freezing the council tax,
No, Gordon, can
you
I just,
weren't wrong. You weren't taking account of conditions which have
what
now
we
changed.
said about the council tax freeze, and you'll find from our commitments and indeed the costing document attached to our manifesto, is that we've consistently said, well, the reason we're 3,000 teachers down, the reason we're losing jobs in local government is because the council tax freeze was not properly funded. We will fund that council tax freeze properly.
You said
under
John
the Labour
Swinney was
administration.
trying to bully local councils into a financial deal which will mean no money for better services.
That's correct, because he underfunded. Thank you for making my point. He underfunded the council tax freeze. Dundee got £1.5 billion
Right.
for £1.5 million for a £7 million deficit. He underfunded. That's why you end up with less teachers
hang
and
on.
less people employed.
So
in
you now
public
agree
services.
with the SNP policy on accident emergency. You agree with the SNP policy on prescription charges.
And they
you
agree with us on the Scottish Futures. They agree with us on the Scottish
on the
Futures.
council tax.
Jobs Fund, they agree
And
with
of
us
course,
on Northern Apprentices.
You
They agree-
support a referendum on independence. So why don't you go and join the SNP?
Because I don't
You've nicked
support
all the policies.
Because the point about this election is we have a pathway which says let's take on youth unemployment, let's change the economy, or spend our time on a pathway towards independence, which can only damage our economy and endanger the very fragile recovery that we've currently got. And could I remind you about stealing policies? Scottish Futures Jobs Fund, National Care Service, reform of the police, and so many other policies stolen by the SNP. And our
Right.
policies
See, the
reflect
problem
the
is-
current economic climate in which we
Right.
find ourselves.
I mean, look, I know where you're coming from with this old triangulation stuff. We don't want to be in a situation where the SNP
So the
can
SNP
say,
are triangulating with us. Thanks for that
can
reference
say,
point. I'll
oh,
understand
you're
that.
in favour of putting prescription charges up. The trouble is, it then comes down, given that your policies and the SNP's are almost identical on almost everything other than independence, people think, well, maybe Alex Salmond's right to say it's just a competition between whether you think he would be the better First
Well,
Minister
no,
or
with due
Ian
respect, I
Gray.
refer you to my previous answer. What I said was, the people of Scotland will have a choice about pathways. Do we take a pathway which is about youth unemployment, growing the economy, or a pathway which will undermine our economic recovery, undermine our nation, get to the Ireland situation, the Iceland situation by independence? That is a very big dividing line in this election campaign, and it's quite right that Scots should bear that in mind,
But the
because
SNP have
the
been running-
ultimate aim and objective of the SNP is an independent
Yes,
Scotland,
everybody
which is
knows that,
hugely
but they've been in
damaging to
power
our
for 3
economy.
years and we're no nearer independence than we were before. People
Oh,
know.
so Alex Salmond doesn't want independence, is that what you're telling
I'm
me?
not saying he doesn't want to, but what I'm saying is that people know now they can vote for an SNP government. It doesn't
Well,
mean
I
independence.
would warn people at that point, Gordon, because they vote SNP, they get independence. That is their reason for existence. That's why they get out of their bed in the morning, and that's what the political debate should be about.
Right, so if it is a choice between Alex Salmond and Ian Gray, why should people vote for Ian Gray?
I think people should vote for Ian Gray for a whole host of reasons. First of all, I've spent a lot of time with Ian over the last 2 or so years. I think he's kicked his butt in most question times that we've had recently. In terms of values, now, what we've got is a banker and a politician in the shape of Alex Salmond, a teacher, an inspirer of young people, a man who went to Mozambique in Africa, a man who works for Oxfam, a man whose values, I think, exude Labour values of fairness. That's why they should vote for Ian Gray.
Right, and you would accept, would you, that looking at your manifesto today and looking at the SNPs, because you say they've triangulated with you, there isn't much difference?
I would say the big question is independence, and we should remind Scots
Right,
that that's
so
the
you're
strategy
agreeing
of the
with it.
SNP.
All right, you're agreeing with it.
We're triangulating, Gordon.
Thanks very much.